In a quiet town where time seemed to move a little slower, Emily lived a life painted with gentle routines and familiar faces. But beneath the surface of her calm world simmered the shadows of unresolved memories and unspoken truths. One unexpected encounter, a voice from the past, a message left too late, cracks the delicate balance she's clung to for so long. As secrets begin to unravel and loyalties shift, Emily is thrust into a whirlwind of choices that challenge everything she believed about love, trust, and herself. In this moment, her quiet life becomes the stage for a reckoning she never asked for, but one she can no longer avoid. The amber glow of dusk filtered through the thin, white curtains of the small apartment, painting the walls in a soft melancholy. Emily sat curled tightly into one corner of the worn-out couch, legs tucked beneath her, a gray woolen blanket draped loosely over her shoulders. The chipped porcelain teacup in her hands trembled slightly, not from the weight, but from the heaviness building inside her chest. Outside, the world continued its quiet rhythm. Cars drifted lazily down the street, a couple laughed as they walked by hand in hand, and the scent of jasmine from the nearby garden seeped in through the open window. But inside, everything felt strangely still, unnervingly fragile, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She stared at her phone lying beside her on the cushion, its screen dimmed now but still etched into her mind. One message. One word. Just a name. Ethan. There had been no number, no contact details, no punctuation, just his name. It felt like a whisper from a past she had buried beneath years of silence, a ghost reaching out to stir the ashes she had tried so desperately to smother. Her hands tightened around the cup, and she felt the burn of the tea against her skin, only then realizing it had gone cold. Her thoughts spiraled, chaotic and uninvited. She remembered the way he used to brush her hair back behind her ear, the scent of his cologne lingering on her pillow, the way his voice could both calm and ignite her. But more than anything, she remembered the look in his eyes that last night, haunted, guilty, unreadable. And then he was gone. No explanation, no goodbye. Just emptiness. Emily had spent years stitching herself back together from the quiet ruin he left behind. She had become someone new, someone who smiled through pain and laughed with strangers. But now, with that single message, it felt like the seams were coming undone. Her heart raced in defiance of the stillness around her, and though the apartment hadn't changed, everything inside her had. She reached for the phone with trembling fingers, staring at the name once more. What did it mean? Why now? Was it even him? Or worse, had something happened to him? 1,000 questions pressed against her chest like stones, but one truth settled in her bones more heavily than the rest: whatever this was, it wasn't over. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, each second cutting through the silence like a knife. Emily sat curled on the corner of her couch, knees hugged tightly to her chest, wrapped in the same gray cardigan she'd worn all day. The fabric smelled faintly of lavender and old memories. Outside, the city was winding down, distant traffic had thinned to an occasional passing car, and the apartment above her had finally gone quiet. But inside her chest, a storm had begun to stir. She stared at the message on her phone like it was a ghost from another life. Emily. One word. Just that. No punctuation. No explanation. It was as if time had folded in on itself and dropped her right back into the moment she thought she'd buried forever. Her mind spun in loops she couldn't untangle. Why would he message her now? What did he want? Was it even really him? She hadn't heard from Ethan in nearly 3 years, 3 years of aching silence, of unanswered questions, of trying to convince herself that she had moved on. And now, one word from him had unraveled it all. She rose abruptly from the couch, the blanket slipping from her shoulders and pooling onto the floor. Her bare feet padded quietly across the hardwood as she moved toward the window. The city looked distant from up here, like a place she didn't quite belong to anymore. Neon signs blinked below, casting shifting glows across her walls, blue, red, then back to shadow. Emily pressed her forehead to the cool glass, her breath fogging the pain. The tension in her chest tightened, almost unbearable. She wasn't sure if it was fear, anger, or longing. Maybe all three. Her fingers curled slightly, pressing against the window frame as if she needed to hold on to something solid, something real. Images of Ethan flickered through her mind like an old film reel. His crooked smile. The way he used to trace her spine with his fingertips while she read in bed. How he had looked at her that last morning, quiet, distant, like a man already halfway out the door. She had asked him if something was wrong, and he had kissed her forehead, told her everything's fine, and then disappeared. She hadn't even gotten a goodbye. The betrayal still stung, but now it was mixed with confusion. Why reach out now? Was he trying to apologize? Reconnect? Or was this some cruel accident, an old contact typed by mistake? The phone buzzed again. She flinched, heart hammering against her ribs. For a second, she hesitated, unsure if she was ready to read more, unsure if she could take it. She picked it up with trembling hands and opened the new message. Please, Em. I need to see you. Her breath caught in her throat. The world seemed to tilt slightly as she lowered herself slowly back onto the couch, the room spinning just enough to remind her she was no longer in control. That message, it wasn't vague anymore. It was a plea. Her thoughts raced. Was he in trouble? Was he sick? Had something happened that made him think of her? Or was this a trap to pull her back into the gravity of a man who had once broken her? She clenched the phone tightly in her hand, knuckles white. She wasn't the same woman he had left behind. At least, that's what she told herself. But if that were true, if she had truly moved on, why did just 2 messages have her heart in her throat, her stomach in knots? Her lips parted slightly as if to speak, though no words came. She just sat there, blinking back the tears she hadn't expected, alone in the soft flicker of city light, caught between a past that hurt too much to remember and a future too uncertain to trust. Whatever Ethan wanted, it had already begun to pull her in. Emily didn't sleep that night, not even for a moment. She lay in bed, stiff as stone beneath her blanket, her eyes wide open, fixed on the ceiling as if it might reveal the answers her mind refused to surrender. The room was dark, but not quiet. The silence was alive, pulsing with the echo of Ethan's message. Please, Em. I need to see you. It had carved itself into her memory like a scar reopening. Her chest rose and fell with shallow, restless breaths. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind recreated his face, not the way he looked at the end, distant and cold, but the way he used to smile at her like she was the only person in the room. That version of Ethan no longer existed. Or maybe, she had simply stopped believing in it. The hours passed, one bleeding into the next. Shadows shifted across the walls, dancing with the faint light of passing cars, and still, she didn't move. Her body felt heavy, her limbs wrapped in invisible chains forged from doubt, confusion, and an emotion she refused to name. At some point, maybe around 4 a.m., she sat up. The sheets clung to her like a second skin, damp from the sweat of anxiety. Her heart was beating too fast for someone who had done nothing but lie still. She rose, her bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor like she was stepping into another version of reality, one that she hadn't prepared for. The kitchen felt colder than it should have, the kind of cold that seeped into the bones. She made coffee more out of habit than desire, pouring the black liquid into a chipped mug she hadn't used in months. She didn't even like this mug, it had been Ethan's favorite. She didn't know why she kept it. She sat by the window again, the same spot she always returned to when the world felt too loud or too quiet. The city below was still waking. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed. She wrapped her fingers around the mug and watched her reflection faintly mirrored in the window pane. She looked lost. Like a woman suspended between two timelines, the one she had built, and the one that was threatening to rise from the ashes. Her fingers trembled as she picked up her phone. She knew what she was about to do, but even then, she fought it. Her thumb hovered over the folder buried in her gallery, the one she'd renamed months ago from Ethan to simply Archive. As if renaming it gave her power over the past. But when she opened it, the images still hurt. She scrolled through the memories, pictures of them at the lake, his arm around her shoulders, her head thrown back in laughter. A candid shot of Ethan cooking breakfast in her apartment, wearing that ridiculous apron with ducks on it. She remembered how warm those mornings had felt, how certain she had been of their future. How foolish, she thought now. She set the phone down, closing her eyes for a moment, trying to shake the ache building in her chest. But it was no use. Curiosity was a cruel thing. It dressed itself as closure, whispered promises of healing, and yet it never delivered. Still, the hunger for answers had never left her. It had only gone quiet, like an old wound numbed by time. She opened their old message thread. Her fingers moved before her heart could stop them. "What do you want from me, Ethan?" she typed. She stared at it. Then backspaced the entire thing. Coward. Or maybe, survivor. Just as she was about to lock her phone again, it vibrated. She gasped, flinching as though the screen had burned her. "I know I don't deserve to ask anything from you. But I'm in town, just for a few days. I've thought about this moment every single day. There's something you need to know. Please, just one conversation. That's all I'm asking." She read the message once. Then again. And a third time, slower. "Something you need to know." That line struck her like ice water. What could he possibly have to say after all this time? What truth had he held back, and why now? Her heart pounded so hard it made her dizzy. This was a crossroads. If she replied, if she agreed to meet, she would be stepping into the past with no guarantee she could find her way back. But if she didn't, would she always wonder? She stood slowly, her breath unsteady. Her coffee sat forgotten on the table. Her thoughts screamed against one another, logic and memory locked in a brutal tug-of-war. She walked to her closet, opened it, and stared at the row of coats. She reached for the black one she hadn't worn in over a year, the one he used to say made her look like she ruled the world. Her hand paused on the sleeve. She didn't know if she was preparing to see him, or protecting herself from the storm she knew was coming. Emily stood frozen at the edge of the sidewalk, her fingers curled tightly around the strap of her handbag as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the present. Around her, the world moved on, strangers passing with warm drinks in hand, car horns in the distance, the flutter of a pigeon's wings overhead. But inside her, everything had stalled. She stared across the street at the small cafe, its fogged windows glowing amber in the dull light of morning. The place hadn't changed. Not the ivy trailing along the awning, nor the crooked chalkboard menu by the door. It looked exactly as it had the last time she was there, the last time they were there together. And that made it worse. Her breath came in shallow waves, each one thinner than the last. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind. She would walk in, sit down, and listen. Stay composed. Remain strong. Show him he no longer had power over her. But standing here now, heart pounding against her ribs like a warning drum, she wasn't sure she could do any of it. What if hearing him brought it all back? What if one look unraveled everything she had so carefully stitched together? No. She couldn't allow that. Clenching her jaw, Emily exhaled slowly and crossed the street, every step deliberate, her boots echoing softly against the pavement. With a trembling hand, she reached for the door handle. The cool metal stung her palm, jolting her with the reality that she had chosen this. She could still turn back. Walk away. Pretend she never got the message. But something deeper than pride pulled her forward. The door opened with a soft chime, and the familiar scent of roasted coffee beans wrapped around her like an old song. Her eyes scanned the room, and then they found him. Ethan. He was seated near the window, his profile partially turned, shoulders hunched slightly as if bracing for a blow. The moment his gaze met hers, something flickered in his expression, guilt, relief, maybe hope. Emily wasn't ready to interpret it. She wasn't ready to feel it. Still, she approached. He stood, awkwardly, his fingers twitching around the ceramic mug before he pushed it aside. "Hi," he said, voice uncertain. "Thank you for coming." Emily nodded once, tight-lipped, and slid into the chair across from him. She didn't bother with niceties. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, knuckles paling as she tried to steady herself. Ethan sat back down, studying her face with a reverence that stung. "You look," he started. "Don't," she cut him off, her voice firmer than she expected. "Please. Just say what you came to say." He swallowed hard and reached into his coat pocket. When he withdrew a folded piece of paper, worn and creased, Emily's stomach twisted. He placed it on the table like an offering, but didn't slide it toward her. "I wrote this a long time ago. I never sent it. I didn't know if I had the right." She stared at the letter, but made no move to take it. Her voice dropped. "And now?" "I still don't know," he said quietly. "But I know you deserve to hear the truth." Her chest tightened. How many nights had she begged for that? For a reason, any reason, to make sense of why he had vanished without a trace? Her fingers trembled in her lap, hidden beneath the table, but her gaze never wavered. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," Ethan said, eyes locked on hers. "I left because I was scared. Because something was happening that I didn't understand, something dangerous." Emily blinked, confused. "Dangerous how?" He looked around nervously, lowering his voice. "I started noticing things. People watching me. Strange messages. And then someone showed up, someone I didn't know, who warned me that if I stayed close to you, I'd be putting you in danger too." Her heart skipped. Was he lying? Paranoid? Or worse, telling the truth? She wanted to scream. To reach across the table and shake the answers out of him. But all she managed was a whisper, "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "I thought disappearing would protect you. I thought I was doing the right thing." Tears burned at the corners of Emily's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You don't get to decide what I can handle. You don't get to vanish and then come back with secrets and expect me to understand." "I know," he said, desperate now. "But if you read the letter, if you let me explain." She leaned back, breath shaky. "You left me with silence. Do you know what silence does to someone who loved you?" Ethan closed his eyes, as if her words physically struck him. She stood, the chair legs scraping the floor behind her. The room felt too small, the air too thick. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said, her voice low but clear. Ethan looked up, eyes pleading. "Just read it. That's all I ask." Emily stared at the letter, torn between fury and the aching part of her heart that still longed for closure. Then, without a word, she picked it up, folded it tightly, and tucked it into her coat pocket. She didn't promise anything. She didn't look back. Outside, the cold air hit her like a wave. But this time, she didn't shiver. Emily stepped out of the cafe into the gray afternoon light, her breath visible in the cold air. The world around her buzzed with the mundane, passing cars, distant chatter, the clinking of cups behind the window she had just left, but inside her, a storm was building. She could feel it coiling in her chest, tight and restless. Her hands trembled slightly in her coat pockets, one of them gripping the folded letter like a lifeline and a curse all at once. She kept walking, instinctively avoiding the main streets, until she turned down a narrow alleyway tucked behind the old bookstore they used to visit together. It was quieter here. The buildings loomed high, casting the space in shadows, and the hum of the city dulled into a muted hush. Emily pressed her back to the cold brick wall and let out a slow, uneven breath. Her heart was pounding like a fist against her ribs, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of not knowing what was written on the paper she now held in her hand. She stared at it, the edges slightly creased, her name scrawled on the front in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting. It was raw, hurried, uneven, not unlike the last time she saw him, when he'd vanished with nothing more than a fragmented goodbye and a hollow promise. The sight of his handwriting alone tugged at a wound she had spent years learning to live with. Her thumb traced the edge of the letter, but she couldn't bring herself to open it. What if the words inside destroyed the version of Ethan she had come to hate? What if they made her feel sorry for him, for the man who had abandoned her and left her to piece herself back together in the silence he left behind? She closed her eyes for a moment and leaned her head against the wall. Memories surged, laughter in his arms, whispered dreams under city lights, the way he used to look at her like she was his whole world. Then the memories shifted, darkened, unanswered calls, the night he disappeared, the hollow months of waiting, hoping, unraveling. Finally, with shaking fingers, she opened the letter. _Emily. If you're reading this, it means I finally had the courage to give you what you always deserved, the truth, _. As her eyes scanned the lines, her breath caught in her throat. The words spilled like a confession, a raw and desperate plea. Ethan hadn't left because he stopped loving her, he left because he feared for her safety. He had been watched. Threatened. Stalked by an invisible force that had wormed its way into his life like a shadow. And in his panic, his fear, he had chosen to disappear. To protect her. To vanish in order to keep her safe. Her grip tightened on the paper until it crumpled in her fist. Her mind reeled. Rage. Confusion. Heartache. It was all there, tangling together like thorn vines around her ribs. A sharp cry escaped her lips, muffled quickly by the sleeve of her coat. How dare he? How dare he carry this truth all these years while she suffered in the silence of not knowing? And yet, beneath the fury, there was something else. A part of her that wanted to believe him. That wanted to believe the man she loved had never truly left her, not in spirit. That his absence had been a kind of sacrifice, not abandonment. That maybe, just maybe, the love she had buried beneath years of bitterness was still alive, flickering in the shadows. Emily slowly slid down the wall, her knees folding beneath her until she was crouched on the damp ground, her face in her hands. She let the tears fall freely now. They streamed down her cheeks, warm against the chill, soaking into her gloves. They were not just tears of grief, they were tears of confusion, of longing, of a heart reopening in places she thought had long since scarred over. Minutes passed. The city moved on without her, indifferent. When the storm inside her had calmed just enough, Emily drew a deep breath and stood. She smoothed the letter and folded it with care, placing it back into her pocket, not out of dismissal, but reverence. She didn't know what she would do next. She didn't know if she was ready to see him again, or if forgiveness was something she could offer. But one thing was certain: everything had changed. The silence that had once been her answer was no longer enough. And now, it was her move. She turned toward the fading sun, her steps uncertain but steady. Tomorrow, she would choose whether to confront him, to heal, or to close this chapter for good. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel entirely alone. Emily stood frozen in the center of the empty road, the flickering light from the broken street lamp casting jagged shadows across her pale face. Her breaths came in shallow bursts, as if each inhalation burned with the weight of everything she had endured. The letter in her hand trembled, stained with a single tear that had fallen moments before. It was from Ethan. "I never meant to hurt you. I'm sorry. But you deserve to know the truth. Meet me where it all began." Midnight. The words danced in her mind like ghosts from a life she had tried to bury. She clenched the letter tightly, her knuckles white, as memories surged back, memories of laughter, betrayal, of nights filled with promises and mornings laced with lies. Her heart thudded against her ribs like a caged bird, frantic, uncertain. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavy and cold. Still, she didn't move. Her thoughts were a storm of doubt and longing. Could she face him again? Did she want the truth, or was she afraid of what it might destroy? Finally, with a shaky breath, Emily turned toward the path that led to the old train station. The place where their story had begun, and possibly where it would end. When she arrived, the platform was deserted. Rusted tracks glistened under the rain, and the smell of wet earth clung to the air. She stepped beneath the fragile shelter of the platform awning, arms wrapped around herself, trying to suppress the shiver running through her. A figure emerged from the shadows. Ethan. His coat was soaked, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes darker than she remembered. He looked at her not with the charm she once fell for, but with a tired sorrow that made her chest tighten. "Emily," he began, voice roughened by the cold and regret. "I lied because I was scared. Of who I was, of what I felt. But I never stopped caring." She didn't speak at first. The silence between them was thick, filled with years of pain. Then, softly, she asked, "Why now? Why come back after everything?" He stepped closer, hesitant. "Because I couldn't live with the silence anymore. I needed you to know the truth." Emily looked away, the ache in her chest threatening to break her. But then she met his gaze again. "I don't know if I can forgive you." "I don't expect forgiveness," he whispered. "Just the chance to be honest." Lightning cracked the sky, illuminating their faces for a moment, two people, broken but still standing. And in that fragile space between confession and forgiveness, Emily felt something shift. Not closure, not yet. But a beginning. A choice. She turned her eyes toward the horizon, rain softening against her skin. "Then tell me everything." And he did, as the storm raged around them, washing away the past and leaving only the truth behind. When the final pieces fall into place and silence returns to the spaces once filled with tension, Emily is no longer the same woman who stood at the beginning of this storm. The lies have been exposed, the heartbreak endured, and the illusions shattered. Yet, from the wreckage, she finds something unexpected: strength. Not the kind born from victory, but the kind carved from surviving, from facing what was meant to break her. She walks forward, carrying both the weight of what she lost and the quiet power of what she found, a voice that no longer trembles, and a heart that dares to begin again.